up a dive. Feel the vibe, get ready to ignite. Untold stories in the airways, flying through the night. Experience voices, tales so bold. Streaming live, the truth unfolds. Untold Radio Network, where secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wide variety. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can't hide. Aliens in the alley, UFOs in the sky. Cryptids lurking, oh my, oh my. Ghosts in the hallway, whispering your name. The paranormal, the unexplained. Become a VIP, get the inside scoop. Unlock the mysteries, be part of the group. Live streaming stories, they're talking to you. Super chats buzzing, join the crew. Untold Radio Network, the secrets come alive. New episodes daily, the mysteries thrive. Great guests, super chat, it's a wild member ride. Share and subscribe, join the side where truth can hide. So if you've got the guts and you want to explore, tune into the Untold, it's what you're looking for. From aliens to ghosts and all that's unseen. Untold Radio Network, where the world's mysteries convene.
The paranormal, UFOs, monsters, mysteries. You're listening to Talking Weird. And now, from a cabin deep in the Northwoods, your host, Dr. Dean Bertram.
Greetings, all my fellow weirdos and weirdettes. Welcome to Talking Weird on the Untold Radio Network. I'm your host, Dean Bertram, and as always, I'm delighted that you've chosen to spend the next hour or so with me, whether you're watching live, where we go out every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Central on Facebook and on YouTube, of course, and also on X, or maybe you're listening after on one of those archived show sites, or maybe you're on a podcast platform listening to us. Thank you for joining us. It's been busy for me this last week. Midwest Weird Fest and A Night of Horror are bearing down. They're two film festivals that I run in Eau Claire, Wisconsin from March 6 to 9. They run actually in the same twinplex. One screen has Midwest Weird Fest, the other screen has A Night of Horror. This is jam-packed with obviously horror films, as A Night of Horror suggests. But Midwest Weird Fest has everything from horror through science fiction to weird offbeat documentaries to fantastic paranormal films you might have watched last week when we had the director of The Sasquatchologist, which is an amazing film, which is screening at the festival this year. There's lots of other good paranormal goodies. So if you live anywhere near Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or if you want to spend a long weekend with me this March 6 to 9, that would be fantastic. It's a heck of a lot of fun, both of those festivals, and you can check it all out at midwestweirdfest.com or a nightofhorror.com. I'm going to do one more plug for people that might be interested. I often talk about the feature documentary I'm making called actually The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, and from that feature length film, which I'm still working on, I've kind of taken a standalone short called The Shaver Mystery, which is just about the Shaver Mystery, which is this big science fiction scandal which happened in the mid-1940s, almost through to the early 1950s, where Richard Shaver, a science fiction writer, claimed that he had contact with essentially alien underground beings who had abducted him to his subterranean world. That documentary has been screening a lot. It's probably done a couple dozen screenings so far. And as the festival season starts to kick off again as we go into the new year, more screenings are popping up. The next one is at the 50th annual Boston Sci-Fi Film Festival. And Boston Sci-Fi is actually the oldest and longest running genre festival in the United States. It's one of the first films to play. The actual festival kicks off with a short block on Wednesday, February 12th at 4 p.m. in Boston. And if you want to get tickets, if you're anywhere near Boston, you can go to bostonsci-fi.com and buy tickets to that. And that is, again, it's the oldest genre festival in America, one of the most respected. And I think if you're anywhere in the area, not just to see the Shaver Mystery, my short documentary, but to go and see any other of the many fantastic films they have a banger of a program. It's absolutely amazing. Speaking of amazing, so is my guest tonight. He's actually back. We only had him on a couple of weeks ago, and everybody loved his tales about kind of cryptids and monsters and things in Wisconsin. We thought we'd have him back to do a UFO one. He's an author, a speaker, a researcher and explorer. He's celebrated for his deep dive into the rich folklore of Wisconsin. As a creator of Badgerland Legends and co-host of the Wisconsin Legends podcast, he brings a unique blend of storytelling and investigation to the mysteries of the Badger State. His engaging presentations have earned him invitations to speak at paranormal conferences, banquets, festivals, and conventions, where he captivates audiences with tales of the unknown, forgotten history, and local legends. And if he ever is speaking anywhere near you, it's absolutely worth going to see one of his presentations because they're absolutely fantastic. So I'm delighted to welcome back to Talking Weird my good friend, Jeff Finup.
Hey, Dean, thanks for having me again.
Man, I'm delighted you could do it again.
Yeah, and I'm excited for the topic. I know it's right in your wheelhouse, especially what you're working on and where you're living. I think it'll fit in, and I think even if somebody's not from Wisconsin, they might learn a thing or two that they didn't know about ufology.
Man, over the years of knowing you, admittedly remotely until I finally got to meet you in the flesh at Milwaukee Paracon, where you did one of your wonderful presentations, the amount of things you know regarding the weird in this state is unparalleled. I mean, maybe Linda Godfrey and maybe Chad Lewis are up there with you, but there's few other people I've ever met with just this encyclopedic knowledge of the weird and wonderful in the state of Wisconsin. So our audience tonight are in for just an incredible treat, and you've actually got a wonderful presentation that you're going to put on screen and follow along with while you're talking about these things. Shall I bang that up now for us? Or?
Yeah, we can put that up, and yeah, as far as it goes, I really stand on the shoulder of giants. Linda Godfrey before us, Chad Lewis with his current work. Even though he's kind of spread out more regionally here. If it hadn't been for his early book, the Wisconsin Road Guide to Mysterious Places or Haunted Places, not sure I would have really dove into this because of all the documentation that's been out there. It's made my life a lot easier as far as hopping in here and grabbing the stories and making them a little more accessible to maybe a modern internet audience. So excited tonight to share with y'all Wisconsin UFOs, a weird history. So, although a small Midwestern state, Wisconsin has played an outsider's role in the field of ufology and the history of the phenomenon. Now, Wisconsin, they're right in the middle. It ranks 25th in landmass and about 20th in population, but it always seems to be a leader in the clubhouse when it comes to high strangeness. Now, Wisconsin UFO stories, they start where most places start, with a wave of mysterious airship sightings in the skies over well-populated areas. Sightings of these mysterious airships, they started on the West Coast in about 1896. Now, these manned aerial crafts, they were normally spotted in the evening or at night. Many were described as bright lights. Some witnesses claim to even see men pedaling their craft across the sky. Now, the Midwest flap, the one that we're going to talk about right now, it started on March 10th of 1896, and it started when a mysterious airship was seen over Kansas City. Now, March 20th, another mysterious airship was seen in Omaha, Nebraska. Now, on April 2nd of that same year, just a couple weeks later, Kalamazoo, Michigan chimed in with one of their airship sightings. April 5th, Nashville, Illinois. April 6th, hundreds of Omaha citizens again saw an immense airship. April 8th, Wolf Creek, Iowa, and April 9th back in Omaha. So it seems like these started ramping up right in the spring of 1896. So on April 9th of 1897, a year later, an initial crowd gathered at Oakley Street on Chicago's north side and watched what was described by various witnesses as a red light, a manifestation, and an airship, is the way it was described. Now, eventually, thousands of people saw the airship in Chicago that night. Later that evening, sightings were tracked in Evanston, Illinois at 8 p.m., Lake Mills, Wisconsin, 9 p.m., Wausau, Wisconsin, and Wisconsin's North Woods at 10 p.m. So it seems like there was a pattern or a direction to these ships. Now, I thought maybe the story of the airship passing over these small towns was just something, someone taking some editorial license with the facts. But this appeared in April 10th of the in Madison's newspaper, the Wisconsin State Journal. It kind of corroborated this, and they had posted an article that said Thursday night at 9 o'clock, a number of reliable people of this village saw what they supposed to be the airship, of which so much has been heard already. And then it said 2 prominent Lake Mills community members reported a great red light moving up and down as if on wings and traveling westward. And at least a dozen people saw it and watched until it disappeared. It was in view nearly 10 minutes and was then lost to sight behind the woods on the west shore of Rock Lake. So, although the Chicago airship was on April 9th and it was tracked heading north to Evanston, then to the northwest towards Madison, and eventually to Wausau, another ship must have been seen that same night in Milwaukee, because that even made the papers in Milwaukee. The Milwaukee Sentinel even published the headline, "Airship Coming This Way." Now, this headline, it even primed Milwaukeeans to look to the skies that night, and sure enough, that airship was spotted. Now, on that night of April 10th of 1897, Milwaukee had its own visitation, and this is one of my favorites. Witnesses all over Milwaukee saw something strange in the sky. A mysterious object passed over the city that night. They called it the airship because the term flying saucer and UFO, it wouldn't be coined for another 50 years. Now, one downtown police officer reported that seeing the airship while standing on Broadway in Milwaukee. He described the airship as looking like 4 bright stars put together. It flashed the colors of white, red, and green. Although a local astronomer argued the airship must have been only a star, the policeman stood by the story. He claimed that the craft dipped and bobbed wildly several times before it sped off towards the northwest and disappeared from view. An unusual behavior for a star. Now, many other witnesses, they concurred that its rate of speed was unmistakable for the movement of ordinary stars. So it seemed to be in motion, unlike a stationary celestial body. Now, the Wisconsin State Journal, April 12th, 1897, about 3 days after that initial sighting in Chicago and that one on April 10th, it said, a great many Madisonians were confident they saw the airship last night. Brilliant lights are reported, especially by those with opera glasses. Now, I love that little detail that they kind of tossed in, because you think 1897, you think kind of a Victorian era, people pulling out their opera glasses, a remnant of a bygone era, and actually looking up to see the this airship. Now, but the local observatory at Madison, probably on the UW campus, they were not as enthusiastic about the unexplained aerial phenomenon. They dismissed the sightings as stars in the night sky. They said the brightest star at present are Jupiter, Venus, and Sirius. They have color decorations and might possibly be taken for an airship. They do not jiggle up and down to any extent, but then perhaps gazers saw the lights of streamers or kites on Lake Mendota. Now, the article went on to say, unfortunately, the boating season is not open yet. So, people flying kites with maybe lanterns on them, but boating season's not open, so it wouldn't have been pulled by a boat. But skeptical citizens of the time, they suggested it was a hoax or a misidentification. perhaps the locals just flying kites again with lanterns attached to them. Now, one newspaper, the Minneapolis Daily Times, even ran a story about an airship anchoring in Rice Lake. Now, Rice Lake is a northwestern Wisconsin community, kind of a lumbering region at the time. The crew called, according to the paper, the crew called for a physician. This distinguished patient, the captain of this airship, was suffering an acute attack of la grippe. Now, I had to actually look up what a la grippe was, and it turns out to be a Russian influenza. And it seems to still be a known virus today that does spread. But it's interesting detail seeing that this was the Midwest of Wisconsin, and here's this Russian influenza kind of floating in on an airship. Now, after a couple hours, the captain insisted the doctor continue on the journey on this airship with him. Now, the doctor, he was even held at rifle point by the crew. Now, a tussle ensued and the doctor wrestled away the rifle. Now, the ship was already 40 feet in air, but the doctor bailed into a pond below where he was later rescued. It said that he kept the rifle, but the airship continued on its way without the doctor's, or along with the doctor's medical equipment. So, what do we make of these airship sightings? Now, skeptics, they'd conclude that the citizens of the 1896 and 1897, they were predisposed to popular literature of the time. Now, it is true, War of the Worlds, the H.G. Wells classic, it began its serialized publication in April of 1897. So this was a full year before those 1896 airship sightings. It was published in Pearson's Magazine in England and the Cosmopolitan in the US. Now, these were serialized stories. So it was kind of a drip campaign where they would post an excerpt or chapter week by week to get readers to tune in to this. Now, the Omaha sightings in March would have predated the release, along with the flap of sightings in San Francisco in the fall of 1896. Now, the success of War of the Worlds would indicate the public, they had an appetite for flying machines and visitors from other worlds. Although not commercially viable or affordable to the broader public, steam-powered airships were successfully operated in the mid-1800s. Air balloons were also a known method of traveling back to France in 1783. So it's not something that was completely foreign or alien, to use a better term. So the phenomenon wouldn't have, been completely alien. Now, Dean, before I continue, did you have any questions on that airship flap or anything to weigh in?
I'll tell you what, I was fascinated. I did a little research myself back in the day when I was doing my master's work before I did my PhD on UFO belief. And I wrote a lot about the airship flap. I certainly wrote about things in Chicago and things in New York and things in San Francisco. But I had never heard that it hit as close. Warsaw isn't that far from me. My girlfriend lives right near Warsaw.
Yeah.
So that's fascinating that the airship was seen there. And to put it in context as well, Warsaw back then would have been, it's a small city now, but I can imagine it would have been a really, a little town back in 1897.
Yeah, it probably would have just come out of that kind of that lumbering era and would have probably just started, on the rivers there, like developing mills for, papers, textiles, what it had been up until like the early 2000s. So not a big city by any stretch of the imagination. So to have such a small population and still have the reports come out of Warsaw are kind of intriguing. So I'll continue on with this. This is the Yerkes Observatory. So 1897 seems to be a key year here. This is the year of the airship flaps in the Midwest and Wisconsin. So Yerkes Observatory, it's an astronomical observatory on the shores of Geneva Lake in southwestern Wisconsin. For people familiar with the area, it's the biggest city just north of Chicago. It's a Chicago vacation staple. They have to cross the border and invade Wisconsin and go to Lake Geneva. Now, The Yerkes, it opened its aperture to the heavens in 1897. It's been called the birthplace of modern astrophysics. The Large Refracting Telescope led to many astronomical discoveries during its useful life. What's important to our story is who was employed at the facility in 1932. None other than J. Allen Hynek, now known as the father of ufology. He worked there while he was a PhD candidate. Now, an interesting quote was taken from his biography, The Close Encounters Man. Hynek said, "You go to this observatory with just a few other people there, and you feel like you might be a monk looking at the heavens, learning the secrets of the universe. You can see how that would lead to spiritual feelings in the right personality. Night after night, under the 90-foot main dome, Hynek peered into the firmament, studying the ancient lights given off by distant yellow-white dwarf stars, and forgetting that anything else ever existed or ever would. Science and mysticism came together every night in the eyepiece of his telescope. Time vanished, dimensions contracted. The whole thing had some sort of mystic quality to it." Hynek confessed later in life, "One shouldn't say that in connection with science, I guess." Now, in his formative years, Hynek, he was actually known to read both Rudolf Steiner and even admittedly was an acolyte of Manly P. Hall. Now, he was also a member of Heidel's Rosicrucian Society. Now, we'll get into Hynek and Blue Book at a little later in the presentation, but Hynek, he kind of weaves through the entire narrative that I'm laying out tonight. Now, we talked a little about the father of ufology, Mr. Hynek. Let's trace the maternal bloodline. So we got the paternal bloodline. Hynek, maternal bloodline, would be Coral Lorenzen. Now, Coral Lorenzen, she was just a girl of 9 when she witnessed what she described as an open umbrella without the ribs or spurs flying silently across the summer skies of Barron, Wisconsin. Again, this is kind of the northwest part of the state. In 1952, when Lorenzen was in her late 20s, she saw another aerial anomaly. Along with onlookers on the Lake Michigan lakeshore community, she witnessed a metallic object with a bright red glow emanating from the bottom of the craft just above the streets of Sturgeon Bay. Now, this would be the northeast. So for those not familiar with Wisconsin's geography, if you see Wisconsin on the map, we have that little land strip that looks like a thumb. Right at that tip of the thumb, or right in kind of the crook of that thumb, is Green Bay, and just north and east of that is Sturgeon Bay. So that would be kind of the gateway to Door County there. That same year, as the most recent encounter, Lorenzen and her husband founded the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, or APRO, an organization dedicated to the study of this aerial phenomenon. Now, using scientific scrutiny, she collected eyewitness reports as well as documented historical sightings of that phenomenon. In 1953, think this is after World War II, in the lead up to the Cold War. Sturgeon Bay, an observation tower, was dedicated to her civilian ground observation course. Now, this was dedicated to sky watching for the threats of the Russians, or the Cold Warriors. And Lorenzen, she actually turned this little observation tower to advance her observations into the field of ufology. So when we should be looking for the Russians, maybe we're keeping an open eye looking for that, but we were also looking for this aerial phenomenon. Now, APRO continued to grow and added branches in many states. Now, in 1969, the Midwest UFO Network was formed by the castoffs of APRO when Wisconsin State University at Milwaukee, a professor, Alan Utke, he co-founded the organization we know as MUFON. So now we have the maternal bloodline, Coral Lorenzen, coming up with APRO, which turns into the Midwest UFO Network, and then eventually the Mutual UFO Network. So before I continue, anything to add there, Dean?
I'll just say it's fascinating. I knew a little bit of this stuff, but nowhere near as much about the actual history of it within Wisconsin. I'm flabbergasted. This is just a fascinating presentation. I'm glad I can sit back and enjoy it just like everybody else.
Yeah, great to hear. And if you got any questions, feel free to chime in. I think you're going to like a slide coming up here. So on June 24th, 1947, private pilot Kenneth Arnold claimed that he saw a string of 9 shiny objects flying past Mount Rainier in Washington. Now, Arnold was an experienced pilot. Arnold estimated their speed to be at 1,200 miles per hour. Now, to put that in the context of that day, it wasn't until 4 months after that sighting by Kenneth Arnold on October 14th of 1947, Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. Now, he achieved Mach 1, 670.84 miles per hour. That was the record. Now, that was almost half the estimated speed of the aircrafts that Kenneth Arnold sighted that day by Mount Rainier. Now, after that sighting, Milwaukee native Raymond Palmer reached out to Kenneth Arnold and bought his story. Now, Palmer was working as the editor for Amazing Stories, but left shortly thereafter to start his own publication, Fate Magazine. Now, the first issue of Fate Magazine, it featured Arnold's story in its full details, recounting his sighting. Now, before the sighting, Palmer had been writing about flying saucers and visitors from other worlds. So when he heard about Arnold's sighting, as well as the sightings leading up to the event, he got excited. It was like these stories he was writing, editing, and publishing were coming to life in his reality. For his involvement in the early flying saucer craze, including writing on UFO cover-ups, Men in Black encounters, Palmer was offhandedly dubbed the man who invented flying saucers by none other than Mr. John Keel. Now, he was really the man on the forefront of the modern conception of the UFO belief. Now, he eventually moved to a small community of Amherst, Wisconsin, not too far from where Dean's living now, where he did much of his writing and publishing, along with his friend Richard Shaver, known for, of course, the Shaver Mysteries. So anybody who is a regular listener or viewer of this content knows well about Ray Palmer. And Dean, is there anything that I missed or anything, any details that I need corrected on Mr. Palmer?
It was a fantastic overview. I think it's worth, just as a funny side note, of saying when the Arnold story first erupted across the news services and was, front page all across America, that Richard Shaver contacted Ray Palmer. I mean, they might have even seen each other. I don't know if they were living right next to each other then or not yet. Probably not yet. But immediately, as soon as the Kenneth Arnold story broke, Shaver contacted Arnold and Brother Palmer and said, see, these things do fly out of the caves. Because Shaver had been writing about things not unlike flying saucers in the pages of Amazing Stories for Ray Palmer for many years in the lead up and on. And then I'll leave it. I've probably said it 100 times on the show before, but when Kenneth Arnold had his famous sighting in June of 1947, June 24, 1947, the Amazing Stories issue on newsstands at the time was the all Shaver mystery issue of Amazing Stories. And some people would say the magazine was already the all Shaver magazine because it's all the majority of it was Shaver orientated material. But in that issue, the famous Fortean writer Vincent Gaddis had written a piece called Visitors from the Void. And that piece described the history of flying saucers without using the term flying saucers yet, and kind of surmised that they were, visitors from, elsewhere. And it's fascinating to me that when Arnold had that sighting on the newsstands was a Fate magazine talking about flying saucers without the name yet. So yeah, as you said, Keel really got it right when he coined when he coined Ray Palmer as the man who invented flying saucers, because the pages of Amazing Stories had been filled with those type of tales, and the cover arts as well, for a number of years before Kenneth Arnold had that sighting. And of course, going on, I won't go much further, and then I'll leave it. Kenneth Arnold becomes very good friends with Ray Palmer, and even visits Amherst later in his life, and they go on to formulate much of kind of the early saucer mythology together in their book, The Coming of the Saucers, which Arnold and Palmer wrote together, and likely Palmer probably wrote most of it, taking Arnold's report and then crafted it into the narrative, which is still worth reading, The Coming of the Saucers.
Yeah, absolutely. So that really started the era of the flying saucers in America. So we'll fast forward a little bit to April 18th, 1961. Joe Simonton, he's a plumber from Eagle River, another Northwoods community. Now, Simonton, he may have entered into an intergalactic barter or exchange. Now, shortly before noon, a saucer-shaped craft described as silver, brighter than chrome, hovered just above ground level on his property. An occupant, small in stature, disembarked. He was dressed in a black two-piece suit. The occupant motioned to Simonton by holding up a jug, indicating that he'd like it filled up with water. Now, after filling the jug and returning it to the ship, a different occupant handed him 3 cakes described as quarter-inch thick, 3 or 4 inches in diameter. Were these space pancakes that Mr. Simonton? Now, for those watching us on YouTube right now, you can see the little corn cake or little buckwheat cake that Simonton is holding in his hand. It doesn't look anywhere nearly edible. Now, the cakes, they were sent to the National Committee for the Investigation of Aerial Phenomenon in Washington. Now, according to a later account, the committee was returned the pancakes without analysis. Now, after receiving countless media requests as well as written letters, the plumber quipped, "If it happened again, I don't think I would tell anybody about it." So he was kind of embarrassed. He was kind of made a mockery, and he was unable to work as a plumber because of all the media requests he was getting. Now, Simonton's encounter, it of course piqued the interest of Project Blue Book consultant and astronomy professor J. Allen Hynek. So Hynek, he actually traveled up to Eagle River from Chicago, where he was working at Northwestern, and was able to get his hands on one of these pancakes, and it was tested, and it was supposed to be of terrestrial origin, and I believe the analysis came back as a normal wheat germ pancake, so nothing too out of the ordinary. I know there's been many myths that's been built around this, like they were devoid of salt, and you would think anything with of human origin would have, or of terrestrial origin would have some traces of salt, but it seems like it was mostly wheat germ, frying oil, and salt that was in the pancake. But the interesting part is Hynek, he recounted later that in a conversation with Jacques Vallée, that the pancakes, he thought they were actually something that was given to him by an unidentified occupant, and he believed that Simonton was telling the truth. Now, we talked a little about Hynek when it came to his work at Yerkes as a PhD candidate. We covered his esoteric inclinations, being a fan of Rudolf Steiner, Manly P. Hall, Heindel's Rosicrucian Society. Now, these revelations, they hardly met his public-facing persona of this hard-nosed researcher and debunker, a man of science. But it was very clear by people that knew him that Hynek did have an inclination for mysticism or esoterica. Now, Hynek, he operated as a consultant from 1952 to 1969 in the Air Force's Project Blue Book. He also participated in 2 other programs, Project Sign and Project Grudge, which were precursors to Project Blue Book. Now, his involvement in Project Blue Book cast the narrative that he was, again, an ardent skeptic and he was the chief debunker. In fact, the great swamp gas hypothesis was shielded by Hynek, likely on the insistence of his Project Blue Book employer, now the U.S. Air Force. This came after a UFO flap near Ann Arbor, Michigan, which migrated westward into Wisconsin, and that's where that swamp gas phenomena came about. It said during this flap, one traffic officer from Monroe County in Michigan even followed an object 70 miles, eventually losing sight of it. I'm not sure how swamp gas can travel 70 miles, but that was the hand-waving explanation provided by Hynek and Company. Now, critics dubbed Blue Book the Society for the Explanation of the Uninvestigated, pretty much concluding that it was there to either cover up any existence of the phenomenon or redirect inquiries into an intellectual cul-de-sac. Now, I think Hynek, he likely traded a role of being a debunker in hopes of gaining a real knowledge of the origins or nature of the actual phenomenon that he was studying. Now, his esoteric leanings and certainly are something that point to him carrying a set of public-facing opinions along with how he really felt on that matter. Now, after Blue Book was shuttered, now some people believe that it didn't close. It just transitioned to a more top secret department within the Air Force. Hynek, he went on to found SUFOS, or the Center for UFO Studies, in 1973. Now, this was a serious scientific investigation into studying the UFO phenomenon. It was based out of Chicago, but he had held multiple chapters, including one in Milwaukee. Now, SUFOS had two principal activities. First, it maintained a library and an archive of UFO-related materials, which are open for use by researchers and investigators who are writing about UFO-related topics. And second, CFOs continues to compile and analyze reports of UFO incidents from around the world. Any questions on Mr. Hynek before I move on to Wisconsin's 3 UFO capitals?
No, but just to note, it might be worth noting, and it's something I talked about a little in my dissertation, that it's Hynek, as you said, likely under the pressure of his Air Force employers. His statements about the sightings in Michigan being swamp gas, which ultimately really led to the Condon Committee. It was after that and the kind of public backlash about the ridiculousness of the swamp gas calls that Hynek made under really almost pressure from Gerald Ford, who then I think was just
I think he's a Michigan congressman.
Before he became vice president and then president after Nixon. That's what led really to the Condon Committee. It kind of forced perhaps the Air Force were happy to do it, but it kind of forced the Air Force's hand to pass it over to the University of Colorado. The University of Colorado was able to do their study, which kind of essentially debunked the UFO topic really for good up until the modern Tic Tac era, really up until that 2017 article in the New York Times from the Condon Committee's results in 1969, which essentially said there's nothing to worry about here. It's not an issue of national security. There's nothing to worry about. So the Air Force could wash its hands of investigating UFOs, which meant essentially the government could wash its hands, because that was the wing of the government, or the armed service of the government, which had taken responsibility for the UFO mystery. So from 1969 until 2017, it really wasn't a public issue, really. I mean, it was sure it would pop up in science fiction and pop up in some news stories, but the government at the surface was able to extricate itself from the UFO mystery. And in many ways, that really hails back to that Hynek claim about it being swamp gas.
Yeah, and unfortunately, kind of tainted the field and kind of closed the book, no pun intended, the Blue Book. And until that 2017 New York Times, it really wasn't something that was spoken in serious circles about that until, obviously the current revelations, which we'll kind of get into as I keep moving here. So, excellent. Wisconsin, they have three self-styled UFO capitals. The first one is Elmwood. It is the UFO capital of Wisconsin and flying saucer capital of the world, although celebrated in jest and almost a mocking fashion. One encounter near the Northwoods town of Elmwood left a police officer shaken. It was April 27th of 1976 when police officer George Wheeler, a 30-year law enforcement veteran, came upon a flaming orange object about 250 feet across and as large as a two-story building hovering just above the ground. He said he could see shadowy figures inside. Now, Wheeler's radio in his squad car, it went dead, and he was found in his police car later that evening. After further examination of the squad car, it was determined that the car's spark plugs and its ignition points were burnt out, and nearby residents reported that the television sets in that area went off for about 10 minutes, about that same time when Wheeler had the encounter. Wheeler said that he had been struck by a bluish white light which came from the craft. Now, he developed severe headaches several days later and was hospitalized, and where they did further tests. His chief, Gene Helmer, said he had never seen Wheeler as shaken as he was on the night of the sightings. He said George saw something, all right, or he would never have shut off his squad car's engine nor kept the lights off, except under extreme circumstances. He wasn't the only person to see a UFO in that area that night. Um, so, so here we have physical evidence of some sort of alien encounter where extraterrestrial or alien messes with a squad car. And then almost a year earlier, it was April 17th of 1975. That same officer, George Wheeler, he saw another object, this one a flaming orange about the size of a football field. Wheeler said that he saw what looked like a or a hose dangling from it. He surmised that it was some kind of charging mechanism since that sighting was near a 69,000 watt power line. Now, after that second encounter, the one where he was kind of zapped, Wheeler concluded that whatever this was, it was out to kill us. So I know UFO Days in Elmwood, you can see by the poster, they're kind of poking fun at our alien overlords or our space brothers. But it was a serious incident that George Wheeler had admitted happened to him and even sent him to the hospital. So, despite the mortal danger presented by these objects, Elmwood, they still hold the UFO Days for a full weekend every July. Our second capital is in Long Lake, Wisconsin. So this would be on the northeast side, kind of by Lake Winnebago. Now, Bill Benson, the late owner of Benson's Hideaway on Long Lake, was once. So the Benson Hideaway was once the mecca of UFO enthusiasts. The bar and restaurant was situated on the edge of Long Lake, which may contend in the area of high strangeness. Now, in 1985, multiple witnesses came forward after seeing a circular object hovering above a farm field, startling a herd of cows. After the incident garnered attention, Benson and his friend Bob Keene, aka UFO Bob, they decided to start the first ever UFO Days, DAZE event. But the activity didn't end there. In 1995, a crop circle was discovered near Long Lake. In 1998, Benson, along with 5 others, witnessed a large orange ball hovering over the Dundee Mountains, which are just next to that lake, just overlooking the lake. As they observed the orb, 4 fighter jets flew after the aerial apparitions. Now, many UFO enthusiasts contend that the Dundee Mountains may be a home to a secret UFO base. But Long Lake isn't just home to aerial phenomenon. Benson also reported that 2 campers in 1989 were out on the lake when a giant black and yellow creature emerged from the water. It was approximated at 25 feet long with a head like a football. The creature was given name Long Neck of Long Lake. Now, over the years, more reports have trickled in of this eerie snake-like creature roaming Long Lake and breaking its placid water. Now, the UFO Days Festival, it ran for 33 years until Bill's passing in 2021. That final UFO Days was held in 2022. The unofficial event was held as a celebration of life. for the departed Mr. Bill Benson. Rest in peace, legend. Now we'll go to Belleville, and this is Dane County. It was 1987, a Belleville police officer, along with the Dane County Sheriff's deputy, witnessed lights in the sky along the town's southern border. Glenn Casimir, a Belleville police officer, was on night patrol when he witnessed a cluster of unmoving lights in the sky. Casimir picked up his partner, Jeff Furseth, and they drove to that bluff southwest of the town. What they saw there, a mile or two south and 1,000 feet or so in the air, were flashing red, blue, and white lights arranged horizontally. The cluster was motionless, and the lights were intense, more like spotlights than aircraft running lights. Casimir said there was no sound, and it was too dark to discern any shape. They were later joined by another law enforcement officer. Eventually, the lights, they moved off to the southwest. They picked up speed and eventually disappeared. The report attracted national attention to the incident. The report was the first of many for Belleville residents, and of course, the weirdness is commemorated annually with a parade and festival near Halloween every October. Now, it's a very Wisconsin thing to find any excuse to throw a party, so it's no surprise that these events are commemorated by beer-fueled festivities. So there are our 3 UFO capitals of Wisconsin, and of course, they are all marked with merriment and festivities. The specific one in Belleville, Dane County, has a parade attached to it, which sounds like a lot of fun. I need to get the kids out there this year. Now, before I continue, any questions on our UFO capitals or any of the incidents that inspired them?
No, I mean, I love that. I love that we have 3 UFO capitals in America. I will say that it was either the first or the second year of Midwest Weird Fest, and we're entering the 9th festival this year, March 6 to 9, at the Micon Downtown Cinema in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. But in the first or second year, we had Mark Borchardt's documentary on one of those UFO festivals. That documentary is called The Dundee Project. It's a short film. I think you can buy it from the Found Footage Festival guys site if anybody's interested in it. And I think if you just Google Mark Borchardt's The Dundee Project, I think you can get a digital download from the Found Footage guys. But Mark Borchardt, of course, is one of Wisconsin's most famous independent filmmakers. He was made famous by the wonderful Chris Smith, I think is the director's name, documentary, American Movie, which was formative for me as a filmmaker long before I moved to Wisconsin. So there's a little Mark Borchardt tie into the,
and I believe
the UFO festival near Dundee.
Nick Brewer of the Found Footage Festival helped produce that documentary as well. So I haven't had a chance to watch that yet, so I'll have to give that a spin. But that one specifically is at Benson's Hideaway, the one that he documented there. So the 1990s, we were primed for UFOs. In 1993, the iconic hit TV show The X-Files premiered. Shortly thereafter, a Showtime film debuted titled Roswell. It was based on Wisconsin investigator Don Schmidt's book, The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell. It was 1986 when Schmidt himself went to Roswell, New Mexico, to investigate the now famous supposed flying saucer crash that happened in 1947. Confident that he would spend a weekend there, debunk it, and leave, Schmidt was shocked by what he found. He had 550 witness testimonials, from people seeing the crash debris to some actually witnessing alien bodies. The book resulted in a movie option and then the Showtime movie that was released at a later time. And that movie was Roswell. It starred Kyle MacLachlan of Twin Peaks fame and, of course, Martin Sheen. So it may have been Stan Friedman who was the first civilian to document the New Mexico crash site in the 1960s, but it was Don Schmidt whose book and the subsequent movie that plunged Roswell into the public, at least pop culture, consciousness. Is this a movie that you've seen, Dean?
Oh, I love that movie very much. I've actually had Jeremy Kagan, the director of that film, who I think he was what are your TV awards here? They're not the Oscars. What are the TV
Oh, the
awards here?
Emmys. Yeah.
He's an Emmy, I think, maybe even Emmy award-winning director. But Jeremy Kagan was on an old Talking Weird before we were on the Untold radio network. So if anybody goes to YouTube and just searches Talking Weird Jeremy Kagan, they'll be able to see that episode where he talks at some length about that film. And Don Schmidt has been on Talking Weird as well.
Mhm.
Of course, is a Wisconsinite, as you were saying. He's and Don Schmidt's a great guy. So interviews with both Don Schmidt and Jeremy Kagan are available if you go on YouTube and just put Talking Weird and then their names in.
Very cool. So, getting up to modern days, it was July 26th of 2023. A House Oversight and Accountability Subcommittee hearing on UFOs was held on Capitol Hill in Washington. This was the famous testimony that took place over the summer of 2023 involving David Grush. So, what does that have to do with Wisconsin? Well, the committee was chaired by U.S. Rep. Glenn Grothman of Glen Beulah, Wisconsin. Although he found Grush less than credible compared to the other witnesses that testified there, he called a little more transparent from the military when it came to the historic UFO reports. Or let me say that again. He called for a little more transparency from the military when it came to these historic UFO reports. So Grothman actually wanted to hold this meeting to get to the bottom of the phenomenon that kind of started in 2017 with that Tic Tac UFO flap. Now, he also supported a bipartisan amendment to the defense budget that would require declassification of all military documents on UAPs no later than 25 years after their creation. So he is a real proponent of at least a government level disclosure. Although this might be appreciated by people who study this field, it's likely most of this research and development is done by private contractors now to circumvent pesky FOIA requests. So although there was a pretty big circus, you see from this photo, we got Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp sitting in the wings right behind Grush. I'm not sure much came of this disclosure. I know David Grush kind of did his media tour. I think he was on Joe Rogan and Sean Ryan show and spoke about his experiences. But the impact of that has not quite surfaced, but it seems like this whole government UFO hearing thing has been kind of a continuous theme with one of these coming every few months. So this really kind of was the thing that kind of broke open the conversation, at least on a congressional level, as far as bringing these UFO or UAP, as they have been noted now, kind of bringing that to the forefront. And that was chaired by Wisconsin Congressman Glenn Grothman. So one more little tie-in to Wisconsin there. So there you have it, from airship sightings to citizen research to the father of ufology, space pancakes, lake monsters, Roswell, modern UAP hearings. Wisconsin, it's been on the forefront of ufology from the beginning. Now, I did a 2-part episode along with my co-host Mike Huberty on Wisconsin UFOs. So if you want more details into all the topics I covered on this episode, plus a story about a flying cow humanoid, a mysterious crop circle that happened in Mayville, Wisconsin, and even both me and Mike's personal UFO sightings, give it a listen wherever podcasts are found on the Wisconsin Legends podcast feed. You can find me Instagram at Badgerland Legends, Facebook at Badgerland Legends, and join the Wisconsin Legends Facebook private group. I know Dean's on there. He's fairly active. He posts a lot of these shows. I'd really love for you guys to hop in there, engage with us, share your UFO stories, your creepy encounters, cryptids, anything like that. Give me a follow on all the social medias. Listen to the podcast. And then Dean wanted me to remind you, I also have a book featuring those space alien or space pancakes, and it's called the Wisconsin Legends for Kids book. And I grabbed about 10 different stories from Wisconsin, and I decided one of my favorite was that space pancakes story. So that one is prominently featured in the book, and it's perfect for kids, probably 6 and up. So give that a check that out at Amazon.com. Any questions from the chat tonight, Dean?
There are, and I'll just say my daughter, who I bought Wisconsin Legends for Kids for when it came out recently, just loves the book. And as I mentioned last time you were on the show too, my wonderful girlfriend Samantha, she bought a copy for both her daughter and her daughter's best friend, who are both, and they're, I think they're about 11 or 12. They're seriously into the paranormal, and they both adored that book. She
Awesome.
bought them from you when we saw you in at Milwaukee Paranormal.
Yeah, she came up and bought a couple copies. I was quite tickled that she appreciated that.
And we love the T-shirts we bought as well, the Badgerland T-shirts.
Awesome. Yeah.
Badgerland Legends T-shirts, great T-shirts. But T-shirt chatting aside, there are some questions for you. First off, I'd give you a big hand if I was actually in an auditorium, because that was a wonderful presentation. I'm somebody who prides myself on my UFO knowledge, and to a degree my UFO knowledge in Wisconsin, and there was a bunch of stuff there I had no idea about. So I feel more knowledgeable for listening to it. But yeah, there are a number of questions. One was from Horace Smith, who's Professor Emeritus of Astronomy and Physics at Michigan State University. And he says, can you recommend, Jeff, a book which does a deep dive into the 1897 airships over Wisconsin?
I don't know of any. I think that would actually be a topic that is ripe for the pickings, for that 1896 and 1897. Most of the information I found was actually on newspapers.com and newspaperarchives.com. I just put in airships and kind of went off to the races on that.
Maybe you and Horace need to co-write that book.
There we go.
There you
go.
I
need another project.
Actually, just listening to you now, I'm like, man, there needs to. I mean, I'm doing a documentary on Palmer and Schaefer at the moment, obviously, but I'm like, you could do a documentary like broader, just on UFOs in Wisconsin in general. There was another general question here, which I'll throw to you. This is a fun Fortean question. This is from Night Stargazer, and Night Stargazer asks, does it seem like some people are prone to see UFOs?
You know, it seems like there's a lot of people that are experiencers, whether it's ghosts, UFOs, cryptids. They kind of are a magnet for this stuff. Me personally, I've had a couple encounters with this stuff, but not frequently. But then you talk to other people, and they hit the trifecta of seeing a cryptid, seeing a UFO, seeing a ghost, and I'm a little envious of them. I know our mutual friend Chad Lewis. He is he's actually like a repellent. He goes out and looks for this stuff, and he never really gets to experience it, and that's unfortunate for somebody who's kind of a seeker. So I think it definitely, there's a certain people, for some reason, this phenomenon is attracted to. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that maybe not only are there some people who are susceptible. I think it might have been Keel. It might have been somebody else. I'm just throwing Keel's name out there because it sounds like something he would have said, that suggested there might even be an umbrella effect. So one person who's prone to see something might be with other people and in their sphere, then the other people get to see the thing as well, because there certainly do seem to be people who have repeat encounters, and not always just with UFOs, but with the paranormal in general. And I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse. I suppose it depends on what way you look at it.
I was just going to say, it depends on your perspective.
Lewis out there every day of the week, like looking for the mysterious and never see anything, or if you're just a normal, 9 to 5 office worker, but you're being haunted by, ghosts and UFOs and Bigfoots. I'm not sure what situations were. But no, it was a very, very active chat, lots of comments in there. It was just great having you on the show again. Is there anything else you wanted to add about?
No,
I
I
think
think
you already gave a rundown on where everybody can get your books and find where you're at.
yeah. If you guys are into listening to the back episodes, about 2 weeks ago, I talked about monsters. If that's more your speed, Wisconsin has a lot of monsters, so give that one a listen. And then a few months ago, I was on to, well, coming up on a year ago, to talk about the book. So give that one a listen as well.
It's always such a great joy to have you visit on the show, and I hope you and I get to hang out sometime soon in the not too distant future too,
Yeah,
Jeff, because it was a great joy getting to see you when we were at Sam and I were at Milwaukee Paracon, and I can't thank you enough for coming on the show, man. So thanks so much
yeah.
for
Thanks
coming
again for
back.
having me. This is the third time, and I guess I'm a member of the three club. So anytime that you and Samantha want to come down to Madison and hang out, feel free to let me know.
We'll be down after Midwest Weird Fest. We have some things which we have to film for the documentary still in Evanston, Chicago. So we'll be
Okay.
back down that way. And I still would like to sit down with Alison Jornlin and do an interview down your way
Yeah,
sometime
that'd
too.
be great.
So we may be back. Man, thanks for coming on the show. It was
Yeah.
great chatting.
Thanks so much, Dean. Have a great night.
You too. And until I talk to you, Jeff, and until I talk to everybody else out there, please keep it weird.